The airport was unusually quiet that morning, the kind of silence that comes right before a storm. Steven Seagal walked through the terminal without fanfare. No entourage, no flashing cameras, no designer suit. Just black jeans, a loose jacket, dark sunglasses, and the calm, heavy presence that always followed him. Most people didn't recognize him immediately, and he preferred it that way. Boarding had just begun when Steven stepped into the first-class cabin, holding a confirmed first-class ticket between his fingers. He moved slowly, respectfully, letting families and elderly passengers pass first. By the time he reached his seat 1A, a flight attendant blocked his way. "Sir," she said sharply, not even glancing at his ticket. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Steven paused. "I know," he replied in his deep voice. "My seat is 1A. The flight attendant narrowed her eyes, giving him a quick up-and-down look, as if examining whether a man dressed so simply could possibly afford that seat. "Let me see your boarding pass," she demanded. Steven handed it to her calmly. She scanned it, scoffed, and shook her head. No. This must be a mistake. Sir, you don't belong here. Please move to economy before we hold up the line." A few passengers froze mid-step. A couple standing behind Steven exchanged uncomfortable glances. One whispered, "Is she serious?" Steven stayed completely still. No anger, no irritation, just that unreadable stillness he was famous for. "I believe," he said politely, "that is my assigned seat." The attendant gave an exaggerated sigh. "Sir, please don't argue. We've had enough people today trying to upgrade themselves. Now step aside." Murmurs began spreading. A man near row 2 leaned forward, squinting at Steven. "Is that? No, it can't be." But the flight attendant didn't care who he was or who she thought he wasn't. "I'm asking you one last time," she said, voice rising. "Move to economy or I'll have security come in here and take you out." Steven Seagal didn't move an inch. Instead, he slowly slid the ticket back from her hand, his face expressionless. Passengers watched, breath held. None of them knew that the next 6 minutes would flip the entire situation upside down. And what Steven did next would shock the entire plane. For a moment, the entire first-class cabin seemed to freeze. The engines outside hummed softly. Boarding announcements echoed in the background. And yet all eyes were locked on the standoff between Steven Seagal and the irritated flight attendant. Steven took a slow breath, the kind of breath that said he had dealt with far worse than a rude airline employee. His voice remained calm, almost too calm. "Ma'am," he said, holding his ticket upright so everyone could see. "This is a confirmed first-class seat. 1A, my name is on it." The flight attendant crossed her arms, her face tightening with annoyance. "I don't care what you're holding. Anyone can print a fake ticket. Until I verify it with the system, you are not allowed to sit here. And stop raising your voice." Steven hadn't raised it at all. Passengers nearby exchanged shocked looks. A man in 1C leaned forward and whispered, "He's being completely calm. What is she talking about?" But the flight attendant wasn't done. "I have rules to follow. And you?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his chest. "Look like someone trying to get something for free. I've seen it 1,000 times." Steven didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for anything free," he said quietly. "Just the seat I paid for." His composure only seemed to irritate her more. She snatched the ticket out of his hand and marched to the front of the cabin, muttering loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ridiculous. People need to know their place," passengers gasped. A few even shook their heads in disbelief. One woman pulled out her phone and whispered to her husband, "I'm recording this. This is unbelievable." Steven remained standing in the aisle, hands folded calmly in front of him. He didn't snap, didn't argue, didn't make a scene. Instead, he simply waited, like a mountain that refused to move. But the flight attendant wasn't finished humiliating him. She came back moments later, ticket in hand, lips tight with frustration. "Well, the system says you have a seat," she admitted reluctantly. "But I think you're in the wrong section. This seat is for VIP and business partners of the airline. You don't qualify." Steven raised an eyebrow very slightly. "And why do you think that?" "Because," she said, hands on hips, "your appearance doesn't fit the profile. And I don't appreciate people lying to me." Her voice carried across the cabin. Several passengers winced. One man muttered under his breath, "This is going too far." Another whispered, "Isn't he Steven Seagal? Should we say something?" But no one stepped forward, not yet. Stephen again remained calm. Too calm. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "I am not lying to you." "Have a seat in economy," she snapped back, "or I'll call security and have you removed from the flight entirely." Somewhere behind them, a child whispered to his mother, "Mom, he looks like the guy from the movies." His mother nodded silently. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Stephen's jaw tightened for the first time, but he still didn't lash out. Instead, he looked around at the passengers who were watching, waiting, expecting him to explode like the action star they'd seen on screen countless times. But Steven Seagal wasn't acting today. He simply stepped aside, allowing other passengers to board, still waiting patiently for the situation to resolve. The flight attendant looked almost offended that he wasn't reacting. His calmness felt like defiance to her. "Sir," she said again sharply, "you're holding us all up. Move." Stephen slowly turned his head toward her. His eyes were hidden behind his dark sunglasses, but the stillness of his expression made several passengers shiver. Then, in a soft tone that somehow carried through the entire cabin, he said, "Respect goes a long way." The flight attendant blinked, thrown off for a split second, but then her ego returned. "Well, respect is earned," she snapped back. A few passengers gasped aloud. Stephen gently adjusted the strap of his bag and continued standing in place, not arguing, not provoking, just waiting. A group of passengers further back started whispering more urgently now. "That is Steven Seagal." "No way, are you sure? Look at his walk, that's him." "Why isn't she recognizing him?" "Broke, it's literally Steven Seagal." But the flight attendant remained oblivious. Or maybe she just didn't care. She leaned in, lowering her voice but not her hostility. "You either move to economy or I call security right now. Make your choice." Stephen's expression didn't change. "I paid for this seat," he repeated. "Well then," she said with a cold smile, "I'll bring someone who can settle this." She stomped off, heels clacking angrily down the aisle, muttering something about entitled passengers. The cabin fell into uneasy silence. For the first time since the confrontation began, Stephen took a step forward, not backward, and placed his hand on the headrest of seat 1A, as if claiming his space not with words but with presence alone. Passengers watched in awe. They had no idea. In just a few minutes, everything was about to flip upside down, and the woman who had insulted him would face consequences she never saw coming. The cabin had gone quiet. Even the soft hum of the plane's engines seemed to pause as passengers watched the silent standoff between Steven Seagal and the increasingly irritable flight attendant. She had retreated to the front of the cabin for a moment, but now she returned with renewed hostility, clipboard in hand, her steps echoing like a judge's gavel in a courtroom. "Sir," she barked, voice louder now, "I've already told you, move to economy. You are holding up the boarding process for every other passenger in this cabin." Stephen didn't flinch. His sunglasses hid his eyes, but every passenger could feel the tension radiating from him. He held his ticket calmly in his hand, letting it hang at his side. "I am in my assigned seat," Stephen said slowly, evenly. 1A, first class. "My boarding pass proves this." She snatched the ticket from him, scanning it again with a sense of disbelief. "This is absurd." "Are you joking? You're not someone we recognize as VIP or business partner." "I know these people. They don't look like you." A few passengers in the middle rows had begun whispering to each other. "That voice, that stance, that has to be Steven Seagal," one murmured. "No way someone this calm would be treated like this." Another passenger, a teenager leaning over the seat in front of him, took out his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he began recording. A woman behind him nudged her husband. "You're filming this, right? Everyone needs to see how ridiculous this is." Stephen ignored the whispers. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the attendant's hostility roll off him like water off a stone. But she wasn't backing down. "You're holding up the line," she spat. "You're disrespecting the rules. And if you don't move now, I'm calling security immediately. Do you understand?" Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A man in 2B whispered under his breath, "What would you do in his place?" Stephen finally spoke, voice calm but commanding, cutting through the murmurs. "I respect the rules and I respect you, but I will not be moved from the seat I purchased and have reserved. That is my right as a passenger." The flight attendant froze for a moment. She wasn't used to being addressed like that, not by someone she thought she could intimidate. She recovered quickly, pointing her finger at him. "I don't care what you think. Move or security." A ripple of whispers spread across the cabin. A woman in the back leaned toward her friend. "He's not even reacting. What kind of man just stands there calmly like that?" The passenger's attention shifted. The murmurs grew louder. "It is him. That's Steven Seagal." The flight attendant, oblivious to the growing recognition among the passengers, took another step forward. "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I won't allow someone to hold up my cabin." Steven Seagal raised a single finger, not threatening but firm, signaling for her to pause. His calm, almost hypnotic presence filled the aisle. The passengers held their breath. "Respect," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "is earned by how you treat others. Threats and assumptions do not earn respect." A murmur of approval went through the cabin. Several passengers began nodding subtly, some whispering. Finally, someone standing up to her. The flight attendant's face flushed red. Her lips tightened, her jaw clenched. She had faced rude passengers before, but none had remained so calm, so untouchable. And now whispers were circling. "That's Steven Seagal. That is him." A passenger in the middle row leaned out. "Ma'am, you do realize who you're speaking to, right?" The attendant blinked. What?" The teenager recording said quietly. "He's Steven Seagal, the actor, the martial artist." The attendant's mouth fell open slightly, but she quickly recovered with a forced scoff. "Well, that doesn't change the rules." Steven Seagal didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He simply took a step closer to his seat, hand resting on the headrest of 1A. Every passenger in the first-class cabin could feel the shift in energy. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a presence that demanded attention, calm yet undeniably commanding. The tension was so thick that even the flight attendants in the back of the cabin exchanged nervous glances. They knew something monumental was about to happen. Steven's voice broke the silence once more. "I do not wish for conflict, but I will not be moved without cause, and I will not be disrespected in my own seat." A hush fell across the plane. Phones were raised. Cameras were recording. Everyone could sense the storm about to erupt. If you were standing there as a bystander, would you step in to help him or stay quiet? Comment your answer below. The attendant, realizing that the entire cabin's attention had turned against her, clenched her fists and muttered something under her breath. But Steven Seagal's calm stare never wavered. Passengers knew, even if the attendant didn't, the next 6 minutes would change everything on that flight. The cabin was buzzing quietly, but the undercurrent of tension had shifted. Every passenger was watching Steven Seagal, whispering to their neighbors. Some were leaning forward, others recording on their phones, and a few were just staring in awe. The flight attendant had momentarily stepped back, adjusting her uniform, trying to regain control. But the whispers had already started spreading. "Wait, is that really him?" one passenger asked under their breath. "Steven Seagal," another replied, eyes wide. "That calm demeanor, that walk, it has to be him." Steven didn't acknowledge the whispers. He stood quietly, leaning lightly on the headrest of seat 1A. His posture relaxed, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. The flight attendant, still oblivious, continued muttering under her breath about entitled passengers and breaking the rules. At that moment, the cabin lights flickered slightly as the captain entered the first-class area. He had come to check on a minor boarding issue, but the tension in the air was immediately noticeable. His eyes swept the aisle, taking in the passengers, the nervous flight attendants, and finally resting on the man holding his ground calmly. "Sir," the captain said, voice polite but firm, "I've been informed there's an issue here. Can you tell me what's happening?" Steven lifted his head slightly, still calm. "Ma'am, I simply requested to sit in my assigned first-class seat." The attendant refused. The flight attendant straightened immediately, her voice rising. "Captain!" "This passenger, he's refusing to comply with the cabin rules." The captain's brow furrowed as he looked at Steven's ticket in his hand. He scanned it, double-checked the reservation system, and then did a double take. "Sir," he said slowly, eyes widening, "do you realize this is Steven Seagal?" Steven simply nodded slightly, expression unchanged. The captain's face turned from surprise to a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "Oh, I see. That explains everything," passengers began murmuring loudly. "Did he just say Steven Seagal? No way. It's him. The energy in the cabin shifted instantly. People pulled out phones, whispering excitedly, some even standing to get a better view. The flight attendant froze. Her eyes darted nervously between the captain and Steven. She had no idea who she was dealing with. In that moment, the entire dynamic of the cabin flipped. Steven didn't raise his voice, didn't demand apologies. He simply waited, letting the situation speak for itself. The captain turned to the flight attendant, voice steady but clearly reprimanding. "Ma'am," he said, "do you understand who you were speaking to? This is not just a first-class passenger. He is an airline partner and consultant. You've just mishandled a very delicate situation." The flight attendant's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but the passenger's collective gaze silenced her. Every eye in the cabin was on her now, every phone recording her humiliation. Steven Seagal finally spoke. Calm, controlled, and measured, his deep voice carrying across the cabin. "I do not require apologies," he said, "but I will not be treated with disrespect. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of whether they are famous or not." The murmurs in the cabin turned into soft applause. A few passengers clapped quietly, others smiled, nodding in agreement. The tension in the air began to dissolve, replaced by admiration for Steven's composed authority. The captain motioned for the attendant to step aside. "Ma'am, I suggest you reassess your approach. Let's ensure this does not escalate further." She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Captain," passengers whispered among themselves, some laughing quietly. She had no idea. "Absolutely no idea," one man said. "She just thought she was in charge." Steven took a slow step forward and finally sat down in his seat, 1A, as if nothing had happened. Yet everything had happened. The passengers were buzzing with excitement, sharing videos, snapping photos, and recounting the tense moments from the aisle. From the back of the cabin, a young woman shouted, "I can't believe she treated him like that." And he just stayed so calm. Steven gave a slight nod, acknowledging the attention but never breaking his calm, collected demeanor. The shift was complete. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. The flight attendant, once the one in control, was now clearly humbled. And Steven Seagal, without a single angry outburst, had taken command of the situation simply through patience, composure, and presence. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you completely? Comment below and share your story. If you think Steven's calm response was the perfect way to handle it, type respect in the comments. Passengers realized something remarkable. You didn't need to yell, threaten, or act out to win respect. Calm, dignity, and composure were far more powerful than any display of authority. And in that small first-class cabin, Steven Seagal had just proven it. The cabin was buzzing with energy now, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. Where moments ago the flight attendant had held the upper hand, now she seemed smaller, almost invisible as the passengers whispered and recorded every movement. Steven Seagal remained seated in 1A, calm, composed, unshaken, the very embodiment of quiet authority. The captain, still standing nearby, addressed the attendant in a firm voice that carried through the cabin. "Ma'am, I trust you understand the seriousness of this situation. You've just handled one of our most high-profile passengers poorly, and that behavior is unacceptable." The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted nervously around the cabin. She could feel the weight of dozens of stares, eyes filled with curiosity, disbelief, and judgment. The passengers' whispers grew louder. "Can you believe her? He stayed so calm." "That's Steven Seagal." Steven leaned back slightly, his voice low but carrying clearly through the cabin. "I have no interest in conflict," he said, calm and measured. "But I will not tolerate being treated unfairly or disrespectfully. Respect is not something you demand, and it is something you earn." A hush fell over the passengers. Even those in the back of the plane could feel the intensity in the air. Every word Steven spoke was deliberate, heavy with authority and yet controlled. The flight attendant opened her mouth to respond, but Steven raised a hand, signaling her to stop. "I have done nothing wrong," he continued. "I am a paying passenger. I have a confirmed ticket. And yet I have been questioned, doubted, and insulted simply because of assumptions about who I am." A few passengers gasped audibly. One muttered, "Wow, he's not just an actor. He's commanding the room without even raising his voice." The captain stepped closer, speaking to both Steven and the attendant. "You see, sir, the rules are important, but respect and dignity are even more important. Your behavior has been exemplary. You have handled this with patience and composure." The flight attendant's face turned red. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter behind her. She opened her mouth, trying to defend herself, but the room was already tilted in Steven's favor. Every passenger was now watching, some recording, some whispering in disbelief. Steven finally spoke again, a calm authority that made everyone in the cabin stop breathing for a moment. "I am not here to humiliate anyone," he said, "but I will say this. Making assumptions about people, treating them without respect, and attempting to intimidate them has consequences. Always." Passengers began nodding subtly, some whispering to their neighbors, others murmuring, "That's a lesson in authority." The flight attendant swallowed hard. She had no rebuttal, no word strong enough to undo the situation. The room had shifted. The power had flipped entirely. Steven's calm presence had turned the tables without a single outburst. A woman from row 3 leaned forward, whispering to the person beside her, "I've never seen someone handle this like that. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he just commanded respect." Steven looked around the cabin, making brief eye contact with several passengers. His gaze was steady, controlled, and yet compassionate, a silent acknowledgement to those who had witnessed the ordeal. Then, in a final statement that resonated throughout the cabin, Steven said, "Authority without respect is nothing, and respect without humility is dangerous. Treat others well always. That is the true measure of strength." The passengers erupted quietly in murmurs of approval. Phones were raised higher. Whispers turned to nods, some even clapping softly. The flight attendant slumped slightly, her authority completely dismantled. The captain stepped in, his voice firm. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to take action regarding this incident. We cannot allow behavior like this to continue in our cabin." The attendant's hands trembled slightly. She realized in that moment that the situation had gone far beyond a simple boarding issue. The entire plane had witnessed her humiliation, and Steven Seagal's calm authority had transformed the narrative completely. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, some whispering excitedly, "This is insane." He just took control without even raising his voice. Steven Seagal sat back in his seat, adjusting his sunglasses. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply exhaled slowly, as if letting the lesson sink into the room. His quiet strength, patience, and composure had not only defended him, but completely turned the tables. "If you were on this flight, how would you react to someone treating you unfairly? Would you stay calm like Steven or speak out? Comment your answer below. If you think Steven's response was the ultimate display of respect and authority, type respect in the comments." The stage was now set. The final act, where consequences would hit the flight attendant and the story would reach its dramatic viral climax, was about to unfold. And every passenger on that plane knew they were witnessing something unforgettable. The tension in the cabin had reached a boiling point. Every passenger was now fully aware of the stakes, and every eye was on Steven Seagal. He remained seated in 1A, calm, collected, and utterly unshakable. The flight attendant, meanwhile, was fidgeting nervously behind the counter, clearly aware that she had crossed a line she could never come back from. The captain stepped forward, this time with a determined expression. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "I've reviewed the situation, spoken to Steven, and spoken to the other crew members. Your behavior is unacceptable. You've humiliated a passenger, and you've done so without cause." The attendant's hands gripped the counter tightly. "Captain, she began, but the captain cut her off. "No, there is nothing to explain. You will be removed from duty for the remainder of this flight, effective immediately." A collective gasp echoed through the cabin. Some passengers whispered in disbelief. Others tried to suppress excited smiles. Phones were raised higher than ever, capturing every second. Steven leaned back slightly, expression unchanged, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply let the consequences unfold naturally. The senior airline manager, who had been quietly observing from the back of the cabin, stepped forward as well. "Ma'am, pack your belongings. You will not return to duty until further notice. This is a professional environment, and your conduct today was unprofessional." The attendant's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but every passenger's gaze pinned her in place. The whispers in the cabin had turned into low murmurs of astonishment. Did she just get fired on the spot? Wow, he didn't even touch her and she's out. Steven finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. This is not about humiliation, he said, letting each word settle into the cabin. It is about respect. Respect is not optional. It is earned through how you treat others. Threats, assumptions, and intimidation have consequences. Let this be a lesson, not just for you, but for everyone watching. The flight attendant stood frozen, shoulders slumping, fully aware that this was the turning point. The passengers, who had recorded her behavior, now had undeniable proof. Their videos would go viral the moment they landed. One young man whispered to his friend, "I can't believe it. Steven Seagal just handled all of this without yelling once, and she got fired instantly. Unreal." The attendant shuffled her way toward the rear of the plane, trying to maintain composure, but every eye followed her. Steven's calm presence filled the first-class cabin completely, leaving no room for doubt about who had control. Steven looked around, briefly acknowledging the passengers who had been recording, giving a subtle nod of appreciation. His message was clear. Dignity, composure, and quiet authority speak louder than anger. The captain, now fully in control, addressed the passengers. "We apologize for the incident you just witnessed. Proper training and respect are expected at all times from our staff. Thank you for your patience." Passengers applauded softly, some laughing in relief. Cameras clicked, whispers continued, and the cabin slowly returned to a semblance of calm. Steven didn't speak again. He adjusted his sunglasses, leaned back in his seat, and exhaled slowly. In that moment, the room understood that he had turned a situation of potential conflict into a powerful lesson on respect and authority. The flight attendant, now escorted to the back, had learned a lesson she would never forget, one that the passengers would talk about for years to come. Do you think the flight attendant deserved to be fired instantly? Why or why not? Comment below and let us know your opinion. If you think Steven's calm, commanding approach was the ultimate lesson in handling conflict, type respect in the comments. By the time the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi toward the runway, every passenger knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. A man who faced disrespect, stayed completely calm, and ultimately turned the entire situation in his favor without ever raising his voice. The story was far from over. Once these videos hit social media, the world would witness Steven Seagal's composure, authority, and integrity, and the incident would go viral almost immediately. Passengers leaned back in their seats, still, buzzing, while Steven simply waited, letting his calm dignity speak louder than any words could. By the time the plane landed, the story had already begun to take on a life of its own. Passengers whispered excitedly as they disembarked, phones in hand, eager to share what they had just witnessed. Videos of the confrontation, Steven Seagal's calm authority, and the flight attendant being removed were uploaded almost instantly to social media. Within hours, the clips were circulating across multiple platforms. Hashtags like Steven Seagal calm and respect lesson were trending. Millions of viewers around the world were reacting, sharing, and commenting. People marveled at the actor's composure, his dignity, and his ability to command respect without a single angry outburst. News outlets picked up the story the next morning. Headlines read, "Steven Seagal stands firm on flight. Flight attendant fired. Calm, collected, unshakable. Seagal's lesson in respect." The viral flight, how Steven Seagal turned a rude attendant into a lesson in dignity. On social media, the reactions were overwhelming. Millions praised Steven for staying calm and turning a humiliating situation into a powerful demonstration of integrity. Some wrote heartfelt messages. This is how every celebrity should handle disrespect, with dignity, not aggression. Others shared personal stories, connecting their own experiences with unfair treatment or public humiliation. Even professional commentators on social media weighed in. Many highlighted the life lesson embedded in the incident. Respect is not about position, power, or fame. It is about how we treat one another, even in the smallest interactions. Meanwhile, the airline issued a public statement. We apologize for the unfortunate incident on Flight 431. We have taken immediate action regarding staff conduct and are reviewing our training procedures to ensure all passengers are treated with respect and dignity. Steven Seagal, however, didn't post flashy statements or gloat. He kept his message simple, letting the footage speak for itself. Later, he shared a brief video on his official social media. No one should be judged by appearance. Respect is earned through how we treat others, not assumed based on status or looks. Stay calm, stay dignified, and treat people right. The response was instant. Millions of likes, shares, and comments poured in. People were inspired not just by the incident itself, but by the way Steven handled it, with composure, humility, and strength. The story became more than a viral video. It became a global lesson in behavior, patience, and respect. For the flight attendant, the consequences were immediate and public. News articles detailed the firing, and social media users debated whether it was justified. Some sympathized with her, while most agreed that professionalism and respect are non-negotiable in any workplace. Meanwhile, Steven quietly returned to his normal life, confident that his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. Passengers who witnessed the incident would forever remember it, sharing the story with friends, family, and online communities for weeks. The viral impact extended beyond social media. Life coaches, influencers, and journalists dissected the incident, highlighting the power of calmness and integrity in the face of disrespect. Across the globe, people discussed the lesson. Standing your ground does not require anger. It requires composure, clarity, and quiet confidence. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of appearance or status, type respect in the comments below. Share this story with someone who could use a reminder that calm dignity is more powerful than anger. In the end, what began as a tense confrontation on a single flight had grown into a global moment. Steven Seagal's measured, graceful response became an enduring lesson. Humility, patience, and integrity are the ultimate tools for commanding respect. And sometimes, the quietest actions leave the loudest impact.